Restless. It couldn't have been long, or at least that was Jeremiah's best guess. The fact that he was still alive was a clear indication of that. Blackness. Nothing but dense darkness surrounded him. He tried to maneuver, but space was limited. In fact, he was barely able to separate his arms from his body. Lifting his hand, he jammed his thumb on the roof, only inches above him. Several times he would bang on the roof as hard as he could, the stiff sound of his strikes unable to resonate through this uncertain surface that lay on top of him. He inspected himself up and down, a suit, a tie, and even his yarmulke. It all started to sink in, albeit as hard a notion it was to comprehend. Hyperventilating, the sound of his breathing brushing along the walls of his congested quarter, he tried desperately to remember what he could. Where was he before this? How did this happen? Why couldn't he remember anything? He began to thrash and kick about, hoping for something to give way. All these questions and more raced through his mind, but none as terrifying as the most apparent fact. He was buried alive. Jeremiah let out several bellows, screaming in short bursts as the air began to deplete in quality, the smell and taste of his expended breaths taking its place. He knew he had only a few minutes or less, accounting for the amount of time he'd been here already. He attempted to claw his way through the roof. This did nothing but bruise his fingers as they now began to bleed. The dampness of his blood mashed within the padded lining of the roof. Jeremiah ripped and clawed at the padding, trying to give himself a sense of progress in his escape. He managed to separate a piece of fabric with his thumb and forefinger, tearing it from the seam from the corner. Jeremiah did his best to feel out the edges. Taking a firm grip of the exposed lining, he pulled with what strength and leverage he could muster. He managed to pull away a large section of fabric of about 2 square feet, though he couldn't see anything. The feeling of making headway was encouraging. He patted the slab of wood above him, trying to hear any semblance of an echo, a vibration of any kind that would give him a sense of hope. His blows, however hard, fell flat. Yet despite this, Jeremiah pounded until his muscles were numb, crying and laughing in a growing, uncontrollable hysteria. All he could think of was how he could have ended up here. Amongst the tears and the sharp breaths, he tried to imagine how and why someone could have made such a mistake. Did they think he was dead? Why? What had happened? What was the last thing he could remember? Nothing. There was nothing he could recall. He never really did anything out of the ordinary. His routine was pretty standard. He only had 2 friends he could speak of, or at least those he would go out of his way to spend time with. His best friend Dan, who he spoke to on and off during the week, and would drop by his house every so often. When did I talk to him last? It was... God, when was it? Thursday? Friday? He thought back as best he could remember. He hadn't heard from Dan in days, probably due to the obvious circumstance. What about Trish? Surely she must realize he's not around. Jeremiah kept in better contact with her. They had a much longer history and were a pair that could share more intimate details. Whatever the reason for this, he was sure Trish had to know of it in some manner. There were nights upon nights when Jeremiah couldn't sleep, that he would be able to call her and talk for however long until... I never could sleep, he began to recall. Jeremiah suffered from chronic insomnia, only able to sleep a few hours a night, if at all. There were times where he even went on 2-3 days without a wink. By that 3rd day, his delirium and disorientation were in full swing. However, that following night's sleep was never better for him, but the years of such a condition had really taken its toll. There really was something, he thought. The drug trials! It was starting to come back. He had visited this hospital recently for yet another complaint about a string of sleepless nights. His prescription filled, Jeremiah left for home. Once there, he sat at his computer and turned off his brain for a while. A few hours of web browsing often helped aid in his sleeplessness. However, this night had been different. He received an email about a new drug that was being put into human trials. It was said to be a long-term treatment for insomnia. At this point, he was willing to try anything. Typical sleeping pills managed to take the edge off for a while, but Jeremiah was in the market for something sustainable, something he could rely on. The list of side effects was typical: headaches, muscle weakness and stiffness, joint pain, and such. It was a fair gamble. Nowhere on this list, however, did it mention being buried alive. Still, he could only wonder how it came to this. The trial. It had taken the meds, and the congestion continued to weigh on Jeremiah, almost as if he could feel the pressure of the earth suffocating him. He tried desperately to shorten his breathing, to prolong his life as much as he could. Continuously, he would tap the far end of the coffin with his toe to give him a readable dimension of his spacing. There wasn't much to go on, nothing had changed, but the continuous inspection gave him something to focus on. When he had regained some strength in his arms, he felt around the torn area and ripped away more of the fabric. His efforts quickly became frantic, trying desperately to taste fresh air. He found himself holding his breath, unwilling to poison himself further until he could hold it no longer. As the dementia began to settle in, his thoughts became more panic-stricken and unnerved. He continued to laugh hysterically, gripping his hair and squeezing it tightly, pulling his scalp up as the hair ripped from his head. He flailed and convulsed, striking all areas of the coffin with disturbed and erratic movements. He began to realize and understand his fate now. In a few moments, he would pass out and die soon after. In an ironic sense, his insomnia was cured. However, he would have preferred a different method. Still, how did this happen? Answers would provide some comfort at least. He could only recall one treatment he participated in. It had to be recent as only a few days ago. I remember, he thought, being in the room, several other patients sitting around him in a lab with two doctors who presented their latest treatment for sleep deprivation. Saltaville. The tests were reported to show promise and were ready to be taken to human trials. The risks were clear, and the money was intriguing. The profits for being a guinea pig weren't a get-rich-quick scheme by any means, but it was a way to pull in some fast cash when needed, as Jeremiah did. With this job slashing hours, he had lost a significant amount of income, and the stress only added to his insomnia. Not able to think clearly, his struggles turned to desperation. A simple dose of 2 pills 1 hour before intending to sleep was all the instructions they were given. They would return after 30 days of treatment to report their results. As it turns out, he was not able to make the meeting. 30 days? Had it been that long? It couldn't have been. He'd most certainly be dead by now. What then? What was the last thing he could remember? From his first meeting in the lab, he went home and went about his routine until it was time to sleep. He settled down and the images became so fuzzy. Nothing was clear. Did he even take the medication? Did he take the wrong ones? Did they give him the wrong ones? Curiosity turned to anger when the possibility occurred to him that someone else's mistake could have put him there. He broke into hysterical tears before the laugh started again. The sheer reality of what had happened was absolutely absurd. Wasn't he examined thoroughly enough before his burial? Well, as far as Jewish tradition goes, the dead are buried within a day or two of death. But where had he been beforehand? Jeremiah coughed. The air was becoming increasingly toxic. He knew he would be dead soon. Damn it! Hadn't the company done a thorough enough check with his subjects? There must have been more that suffered the same disturbing fate as him. Were they buried too? They had to be. A cover up. His brain ran from rational to senselessness. One moment he would be in tears, then sudden lash out at a coffin. In a sense, at the world. Then to fits of laughter. As the air grew thicker, he began to babble to himself. Someone had to have seen me before this. No one noticed me breathing? How? His anger grew. Accept the fact that Jeremy's dead. No one cares. Just bury the fucker, right? He coughed some more. This was it, he thought. The air tasted bad. The air tasted bad. Very polluted. Jeremiah felt the urge to throw up. He held it back as long as he could, but the sensation was too much as he turned his head as far to the right as his neck would allow and retched. Immediately, the smell only made matters worse. He coughed again, spitting up whatever was left inside him. The vomit sat in a puddle next to his ear, and he could feel it settling around in his head until the cushions absorbed the liquid. It started a dreadful warm and then cooled to a decaying room, earthly temperature. The smell hung heavily still, adding to the toxic concoction that was slowly choking him. With no watch or phone, Jeremiah could not tell how much time had elapsed since he came to. He felt, however, that it had been several minutes, 10, maybe 20. How was he still alive? Or conscious, for that matter? Surely the conditions and strength of time succumbing thereto was enough to do him in. Why hadn't he expired? He drifted in and out of senility, losing bits and pieces of time, but yet never dying. It was here he lost all track of how long it had been. An hour? 2? A day? My God, how could he have survived this long? Jeremiah rapped on the roof of the coffin with what strength he had left. The efforts vain, he knew, also aware of the effect such labor would have on his psyche. Dashing hope with every knock, the results became that much clearer. No one was coming. No one could hear him. He was trapped, buried alive. Why? He desperately wondered, why wouldn't I die? The thought of still being alive after all this time not only opened his eyes to something extraordinary, thing that no one would ever know about. Jeremiah knew it was grim torture that he would be buried alive forever.